But today we are talking about legacy. My name is Ryan, and that's all you need to know. But legacy. What is legacy? Now, when I think about legacy, I've actually had two major studies in my life that I have put time into and years into studying. One is church leadership, and the second one is computer science. Now, when I look at those two things, they are completely different, but both of them pertain legacy as a part of it. Now, in computer science, legacy means an old software or old code that's still popular. And so it's old software that's still in use. People want to use it. Companies, I don't know if you know this or not, they don't like spending money. Okay, so they will keep old software as long as it works. And so a software engineer has the joy of opening up the hood to that old software and fixing bugs in what's called legacy code. It's not a fun assignment, right? Fixing other people's problems. It's not fun. You'd rather make your own problems, right? All right, so you look at this legacy code and you are maybe building an interface to bring in to connect it to newer software, or maybe you're just having to fix bugs. Well, the problem is that legacy code has been fixed before. And so many hands have gotten in there. And everybody who's gotten in there had a different style and a different goal. And so now that legacy code is all kind of mangled up and knotted, and it's messy. It's not fun. All right, so that's legacy in computer science. Legacy in church world, we've already thrown the word around a few times with the hopes that you know what we're talking about. But legacy is one of those words that it's kind of hard to define. In fact, they did define it for us, and this is what it says. So legacy is money or property given to another by will. All right, now that's easy, right? That's tangible. All right, so what was his legacy? Well, he left so much money and he left so much property and he gave it to him, her, and her, and her. That's legacy. That we could all agree on, right? That's definable. It's tangible. It's been that definition since the mid-1600s. But over our 16th century, rather. But over the last 500 years, it's kind of morphed into a more metaphorical meaning, which is what the second one kind of leans into. Something. So anything. Not just something physical, not something you can count or touch, but anything handed down from an ancestor or a predecessor or from the past. So it's anything that has been handed down. And so as Pastor Daniel and Jacqueline were up here today, I was talking about their legacy being the love that they passed down, being the passion that they passed down, being the desire to know God more that they passed down. These are things that you can't touch, you can't see, you can't feel. And unfortunately, they're subjective. So it's very hard to actually determine what kind of legacy you're going to leave. And I'm going to be honest with you. This has been a hard message for me to prepare because I like concrete things. I like building a foundation on something solid. I like being able to put my foot down and know it's not going to shake. And I cannot teach you how to build a legacy because a legacy is subjective. A legacy is one of those things that's in the eye of the beholder. See, as we talk about King David, you and I think about David and we think about that giant. We think about that brave warrior that led those 400 misfits. That man who could do whatever he put his mind to do. But if we were to ask his children what his legacy was, well, Ammon would have one. Tamar would have a different. Absalom pretty much hated the guy. Adonijah would be different. Solomon would be different. Legacy is subjective. Even someone that we revere has a spotty legacy to somebody. So how can I stand up here and tell you how to build a good legacy? I can't. because it's intangible. You can't touch it. You can't erase and start over. You can't change what you've done. And even if you do it better, it doesn't mean people will receive it. But the truth is, your legacy is already in development. So though you can't build it, it's already started. Though you can't change it, and to be honest with you, I struggled from a philosophical standpoint to write this message. I'm be honest, Jennifer could tell you. I mean, it was Thursday, and I didn't have anything on the paper but one sentence. I was supposed to have my notes in by Thursday. That's what me and Andy said. Yeah. Hadn't even started. Now, I had a lot of conversations up here. I had a lot of things going. I mean, I talked through the whole thing 3 times, and I kept coming back to the same thing. Matter of fact, I had a little fun. I'm going to be honest, and Hope, if you're watching this, I apologize in advance. But I had a little fun. Hope actually messaged me on Thursday. Now, Thursday was an interesting day for me. If you know, I've said this before, and I'm sure you all remembered it because you remember everything I say, but I work for a roofing manufacturing company, and I work in the quality department. I'm a process control specialist, whatever that means. Nobody knows, which means I get to do what I want. But basically, I'm in charge of our processes in the quality side of things, like testing and various things like that. I'm in charge of making sure that our control documents, you know, our SOPs and different things like that get filed properly for corporate. So some of my stuff is administrative, some of it is actually hands-on, and then I have some free time to get to do what I want to do, right? So I like that part. But on this particular day, I had an assignment that I didn't really care for. We have, you know, one of our warehouses, we are setting aside some space. And for when we have material that needs to be put on hold. And so we're calling it our red tag area, and it is mine. I'm in charge of it. And so what I did was organize it, and I had to paint some lines to separate the rows. Now, it was cool for everybody this week. The weather was nice for everybody but me, apparently, because I was sweating. Right, I had a Tyvek suit on so I wouldn't mess up my nice clothes, right? And I'm out there with a paint roller, and I'm rolling these lines after I had squatted on the ground and put my tape out with my tape measure and make straight lines, because if you're going to do it right. You hear what I'm saying? That's the message on legacy right there, all right? Do it right. And so this is my disposition when I get a direct message from Hope asking me to honor our pastors today. And so I wanted to have a little fun with her. This is what she says. She says, I heard you were speaking on legacy. We thought it would be a great idea because it fits with that topic to have our pastors up here, and then we could talk about legacy and how and I was like, okay. So I took a break from painting, and I wrote a DM this long. And I said, well, actually, I was going to talk about success. And I went on and I said, you know, I was going to talk about success and learning through failure. And I was going to call it Start Small and Fail Big. And then I made this whole thing up. And I said, well, that's 10 pages gone, right? I guess now I'm talking about legacy. And I go through this whole thing, and I send it to her, and I talk about how intangible success is and how intangible legacy is and how you have no control over it and all this other stuff. And I send it to her, and or at the very last sentence, I said, well, I guess what we'll do is we'll sing, I'll have the Mosleys come up, and then I'll pray, and we'll just go to an early lunch. That's what I thought would happen, right? A little chuckle, right? This guy's playing with me. No, it was like ellipsis, nothing. Ellipsis, nothing. Ellipsis, nothing. So I copied it and I sent it to my wife, and I said, hey, I just sent this to Hope. She says, why do you do this to people? Right? It's like, they don't know you like I know you, okay? So she sends back and she says, about the sermon stuff, this is Hope. She said, maybe you need to touch base with Pastor Daniel. But are you still going to be able to have them on the stage before your message? And so I sit back, I was just kidding. I was talking about legacy the whole time. And she's like, oh. And then there was a bunch of emojis, like this and stuff. But the truth was, I was struggling because of the intangibility and the subjectivity of legacy. In that you could live what you think is a perfect life and somebody else will look at it and find only fault. It's that person who says, you know what? I want my success is to take care of my family, but the family only sees that you're never home. My success is that I'm going to be with my family, but the family sees we never had anything extra. You can't win. Right? The more you think about it, the deeper you dive into it, the more frustrating it is. How can I change somebody's mind? I can't. And the truth is, most of the teaching on legacy, I believe, is false. I believe it's fantasy. Because they teach you to do the best you can to make an impression on what you think other people think, which is just fantasy. Unless you can read minds. So this was a deep, deep struggle of a week for me, all right? I want your pity, okay? I want you to understand that when I take a task, I really take it to task, okay? But here I am. I finally admit that it's subjective and intangible and that it's already in development. And that was freeing. All of a sudden, my conundrum was my savior. Because when I can admit that it doesn't matter what I do, other people are going to see me how they want to see me, then I can start building the life that I believe God has for me, and I let the chips fall where they may. And I believe this is what David did. Now, I can point out failures in David's life. But at the end of the day, you can't say David didn't do what he thought he should do. Right, wrong, or indifferent. That's between him and his God. So there's a freedom in admitting this. There's a freedom in just letting go of that. And but the other thing, while I was struggling, I was really focused on this painting, and I was reminded of when I started teaching and preaching years ago. And it's probably been over 20 years when I did my first teaching. It was either a Wednesday night or a Sunday night. They weren't going to give me prime time, but they were going to try me out. It might have been like a Thursday, and they just had a group. I don't remember what day it was. But what I found out really quickly was, and what they told me very quickly, was that I was dry. And they were like, you cough a lot. Maybe you should have some water with you. That might just be a nervous tick. And I'm like, you know what? You're right. You're right. And so I started thinking that if I don't have a water bottle, I'm not going to be able to make it through. But when I really started thinking about it, when I would do kid things, when I would do like kids ministry, and I would act like an idiot, a.k.a. Ryan, in front of people, people laughed. And I was never nervous when I did a character. I was never nervous whenever I went up and taught. When adults were around and I was teaching kids, because I didn't try and teach to adults. I was trying to teach to kids, but I always taught the kids a little bit above their head because I want to stretch them. That doesn't mean I taught below the adults, because I found that most adults are just kids anyways, right? But what I found was if I could get people to laugh, if they would laugh, their walls would come down, their faces would not be looking at me like this. Yeah, check your faces, people. Yeah, you're communicating as much as I am. But the walls would come down, and I would settle down, and I would quit coughing, and I wouldn't need the water as much. And so When I figured that out, the light bulb went off. And when you start doing something, the only thing you know to do is mimic other people. You're like, well, they're good at it. I want to do what they do, right? And so I came from a denomination that had magnificent preachers. I mean, they were amazing. They would set you on fire and turn you loose, and you're out in the street for 30 minutes not knowing what happened, right? And so they were like something else. And here I am like, I don't know if I'll ever be like that. But one thing they do is tell jokes. So I need to find some jokes. And so I was reminded while I was painting those lines of my first joke. I believe it was the very first joke that I told with one of my messages. And Andy said he was ready to hear it because I wrote first joke in my notes. So this is that point, Andy. I hope you're ready. All right, so this is that first joke. Remember, I was painting lines in a warehouse. That's why I thought about it. And so the joke goes like this. So there was a man who got hired by DOT to hand paint a highway. All right, so they brought him in. They said, this is your stretch of highway. We want you to hand paint these lines. And he was like, cool. He said, you got it? You're going to have to hand. I got it. So he takes his bucket and his roller. He goes out the first day. He paints 5 miles of lines. It was a record. Boss brought him in. They were like, dude, we've never had anybody paint 5 miles of lines, right? And he was like, well, cool. All right. Next day, it was 4 miles. The next day, it was 3. 2 weeks, by the end of 2 weeks, he was only painting a half a mile a day. So that same boss brought him in. He wasn't so excited. And he was like, what happened? So you started out with a bang, and now you're just like barely working. You're our lowest person. What's happened? He said, well, I don't really know. He said, come on, talk to me. What happened? He said, was it too hot for you? He's like, no, it's not too hot. He said, well, you're having trouble at home? No, home life is okay. He said, what's the problem? He said, it's that paint can. And the boss is like, the paint can? What's wrong with the paint can? And the guy said, well, every day it gets further and further away. Yeah, I learned 2 things when I told that joke. First of all, I'm not good at telling jokes. So I was going to have to do something else, right? The second thing is when people laugh, they listen. Just the idea that I was telling a story made you want to listen, even though it was a corny joke. But the further point of this is like life. We start out with a bang. We tell people that we want to get going, right? You got to hit the ground running. You start out with a bang. This dude started out painting 5 miles of highway, impressed everybody. But eventually he slowed down because he left his source at the starting line. He forgot to carry the source. You can't paint without paint. I don't know if you know that. So here's this dude walking miles in one direction with a little bit of paint, smears it, walks miles back in the other direction. And that's what some people do in life. They get a little dip of the source, and they go as far as they can. And then they walk back, and they're like, I need that source. And they walk again. And they wonder why everything in between is so dry. And why they can't get anywhere. It's because you don't just want to start with a bang. Now, why do we say that? Why do we want to start out so good? Well, there's this one statement that everybody knows, right? You never get a second chance to make. Y'all cheated. Y'all looked at the screen. You never get a second chance to make a first impression. And it's important. First impressions are important. All right? So let's look at some first impressions in David's life. So this is the beginning of David's legacy. This is the first time in Scripture that we see David mentioned at all. And so Saul has lost favor with God. David is going to be anointed as the king, but nobody knows that, not even Samuel. So Samuel's sent to the house of Jesse. He's looking at all of his sons, and God's like, nope, nope, nope. And Samuel's like, are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure? Right? And so finally, he says this, and he said, Jesse had 7 of his sons pass before Samuel, but Samuel said to him, the Lord has not chosen these. So he asked Jesse, are these all your sons? And so they're still the youngest. Okay, so this is a true Cinderella story of They pageant all the kids in front of the person except for the one that they should have. All right, so they're going to make a king. Jesse, his dad said, well, it's definitely not David. Have one of my other sons, okay? So it says he's tending the sheep. Samuel said, send for him. We will not sit down until he arrives. So he sent for him and had him brought in. He was glowing with health and had a fine appearance and handsome features. Then the Lord said, rise and anoint him. This is the one. I think it's funny because Samuel's like, we will not sit down until he gets here. And the first thing God says is, get up. So apparently Samuel's like, y'all are going to stand up. I'm sitting down, right? It says, arise and anoint him in this one. So this is the one. So Samuel took his horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. Samuel then went to Ramah. So the Spirit of the Lord came upon David. This is Samuel's first impression of David. This is our first impression of David through the eyes of Samuel. So we're getting hearsay, right? So we form our opinion based off of Samuel's opinion. So now let's look at Saul's first impression. A little bit further down in the same chapter. So Saul said his attendant, find someone who plays well and bring him to me. So before I said, Saul was being tormented by a spirit, and the only thing they found to soothe it was music. And so they're looking for somebody who's good at music. So Saul's like, hey, find me somebody who plays well and bring him to me. So one of the servants answered, I have seen a son of Jesse of Bethlehem who knows how to play the lyre. He is a brave man and a warrior. He speaks well and is fine looking, right? Me and David have something in common. People cannot get beyond our face, okay? First impressions are always physical. Have you noticed the mark between the two? It always came back to physical. This is a psychological thing. First impressions are always somewhat physical. Why? Because our minds have to process so much stimuli that if we took in everything and actually examined it, our minds would just blow. Right? They would just... So what do? We categorize things really quickly. And we do it from physical appearance. So these people were looking at him, they said, well, he's handsome according to my standards, so he must be trustworthy. This person is not, so they're suspect. So this is what happens with stereotypes, right? It's a mechanism that our minds use to actually sort and filter information. God created us that way, but God did not create us to stay that way and to live through those stereotypes. And so what happens is, this guy actually looked further, and it's because he had seen what David had done. Remember, Samuel had just met David. He had not seen anything David had done. But the Spirit of God had come upon him, and now the servant is telling Saul that this man is a mighty warrior, he's brave, and he's not bad looking, right? So there's still that physical first impression. So when you go to a job interview, what do? You dress nicely. Right? You want to make a good first impression. When you go to a job interview, what do? You research the company so that you can talk about the company. And this is what we're trained to do. You want to make a first good impression. I want you to like the way I look, and I want you to like the way I talk. These are all instant first impressions. But if we stay in first impressions, we're leaving our paint can behind. We have to grow. And we have to continue. So Saul sent messages to Jesse, and David said, send me your son David, who is with the sheep. So Jesse took a donkey, loaded it with bread, a skin of wine, and a young goat, and sent them on with his son David to Saul. David came to Saul and entered his service. Saul liked him very much, and David became one of his armor bearers. So this is Saul's first impression of David. He could play. It's like a little U-shaped harp called a lyre. He could play that. So this dude is a brave warrior and a singer. We have a lot in common, actually, me and David. You have to agree. You have to. Right? So he makes an excellent first impression. I mean, he's fantastic. he is what people expect to see in a brave warrior. Surely he's going to have a life of success. Surely he's going to be given a legacy. And the truth is that before all of this happened, God said something, and I don't have it on the screen, but he said something in 1 Samuel 13:14 when he was talking to Samuel. He told him that I'm leaving Saul, and I'm going to find a man after my own heart. And I've always struggled with that concept, a man after my own heart, when it comes to David. Because David, we actually get to see the blemishes in David's life. The blemishes that would be a part of his legacy as well. But God said, this guy is a man after my own heart. And it's from that declaration that God promises him a legacy. And so we see this in 2 Samuel as we jump through. We see this in 2 Samuel. So we've moved a whole nother book because Pastor Daniel has already talked extensively about David. If y'all want to go back and watch the series, I recommend it. And so we're jumping around today, and he says this in 2 Samuel chapter 7. The Lord declares to you that the Lord himself will establish a house for you. So he's talking to David. When your days are over and you rest with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, your own flesh and blood, and I will establish the kingdom. He is the one who will build the house, who will build a house for me, for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father, and he will be my son. When he does wrong, I will punish him with a rod wielded by men, with floggings inflicted by human hands. But my love will never be taken away from him, as I took it away from Saul, whom I removed before you. Your house and your kingdom will endure forever before me. Your throne will be established forever. So who's the he? He's talking about Solomon. We won't find this out until 1 Kings. But he's talking about Solomon taking over for King David. When we talk about legacy, if you really start thinking about it, you think, well, that's what I need to worry about when I'm older. But the reason why I went with first impressions is because we're already building our legacy. Everything David did was a part of that legacy. And God had called him before and set him apart for this reason. He was going to make him king and his son king. And he was giving him a legacy, and he promised it to him. And so David had to live a life to be worthy of this legacy with God. Right? He had to live his life with God. What do they say integrity is? Integrity is who I am when nobody's watching. Integrity is who I am when only God's watching. And David had to live a life of integrity to have a legacy that God would bless. But that doesn't mean that legacy wasn't tainted. In fact, that legacy includes his failures. So failures are legacy too. I want to show you the point in Scripture when David's life shifted. Up until this point, David was the man who could do no wrong. David was the man who had stood up against Goliath when everybody else was afraid. Right? So David comes, he's already been an armor bearer for Saul. Saul knew who he was. David had gone back home. He came back, he heard the giant talking, and he's like, what are y'all doing about this punk out here? And his brother's like, you're a punk. Why don't you just go home and shut up, you know? And he's like, no, nobody defies my God, the God of Israel. I mean, that passion in this pompous boy, right? That's what the guys thought. They're like, man, he's going to get us all killed. Y'all shut him up. Okay? So he's like, what are we doing? Why don't we go out there and kill him? And they're like, all right, you go talk to the king. Thinking, King's going to set them straight. King's sitting in there. Y'all remember the one thing that was King Saul's thing, that the reason why he was chosen to be king? It's because he was head and shoulders above everybody else. That was not metaphorical. That was physical. He was tall. He was the tallest man in the kingdom, apparently. And who should fight the tall guy but a tall guy? That's the way I look at it, Aaron. All right? God, thank you. I'll be like, all right, we'll be out in a minute, Aaron. I got you back, bro. You know, yeah. So, who should fight him but King Saul? He was the king. Kings were warriors. What does Saul do? In all of his bravery, he looks at him and he says, bring in my armor. Put it on him. And he said it didn't fit. So he's like putting on this armor, and it's like putting on your dad's T-shirt when you were a kid. You know, it's probably your breastplate probably down to here, and he's standing there, he's like, I don't think it's going to work. You see me? Because I look like an idiot right now, you know. And Saul's like, I don't know. Maybe if we tuck it in a little bit. Because no matter what, Saul was not leaving his throne to go face that guy. And as David's like taking it off, he's like, drops it on the ground. He says, no, I'm going to do it my way. I'm going to do it the way God designed me. He said, when I faced the bear and the lion, I took my slingshot and I knocked him out. Killed him dead. That's the way I fight. I don't fight the way Saul fights. You see, when you start doing something, you look at people you want to emulate and you mimic them. But once you start getting good at something, you quit looking to mimic and you start looking to lead. And so David says, nope, I'm going to be me. If I'm going to deserve a legacy that God has for me, I've got to do it the way he's made me. So if you want to have a legacy, you can't do it the way your mom did it or your dad did it or your brother did it. No matter how much you admire them, you have to do it the way God made you. And he goes out there and he fights Goliath and he kills him, and he's the only one who could have done it. Killed him with his own sword. Right? He went out there with a slingshot and chopped the dude's head off because he took the weapon from the giant. His brothers said he couldn't do it. Saul didn't know if he could do it or not, but he wasn't going to do it. This is what legend is made of. And as the legend of David grew, could you imagine being a child of David? Could you imagine being someone who had the surname that David had? And when you walked around, they said, that's King David's son. And you think instantly, that's going to be my legacy. The only problem is, you're not King David. And maybe you don't have a famous, legendary father. Maybe you have a father that wasn't there. And you think your legacy is, I will not take responsibility because he didn't take responsibility. Or maybe you had a father that was there and he was overbearing. And you think, as every teenager does, I will never treat my children that way. And that's why parents laugh. Because they were that teenager. But your legacy that you have received. You see, a lot of times in our society, we knock down people for taking a good legacy. As if undeservedly. And I hope you don't mind. Last week you shared your history. And it was of a broken marriage. And because he shared that, I didn't want to share my history. Of a mom and dad who've been married over 50 years. I didn't do anything to deserve it, any more than you did something to deserve what you went through. But I shouldn't be ashamed of it. But in our society, we're taught that you should be ashamed because over half the marriages end in divorce, which is not even true anymore because most people aren't even getting married anymore. So that number has gone down because people aren't even getting into it because they're saying, why would I dive in if it's already going to fail? So we have a legacy of failed marriages in our country. And to protect the ones who went through it, we don't shine lights on the ones who made it. My legacy is of a mom and dad who were married over 50 years, still kicking today. They embarrass me. You're watching this, you embarrass me sometimes. You're too intimate. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. But my wife and I have been married 22 years, almost 23 in January, so not even quite half. But because of the legacy that my parents passed down to me, I saw what it meant to work hard. I saw that my parents would get up every day and go to work. I saw that my dad would get up and maybe he was so sick he would throw up, but he wouldn't miss work. I saw my mom working. My mom worked a lot of jobs when I was little. She would go, right? She started out doing home interior shows at night. She would be leaving when we get home from school or whatever, and she would go out and she would be gone into the night doing these home interior parties. Does anybody even know what home interiors is anymore? Right? Then she worked in several other jobs. I'll get it wrong if I try and list all of them. I learned what it meant to work hard. No excuses. They would wake us up on Saturday and give us a list of things to do too. Because you're going to live here, you're going to work. I said they would get up on Saturdays and give us a list too. If you live here, you're going to work, right? It's like Eddie Murphy in the cartoon, fan the flame, Anyway, old cartoon, sorry. So, I learned what it meant to be loyal. Because over 50 plus years, I witnessed fights. Some of them were not pretty. Some of them cut deep wounds. But they always came back. They said, we're not going to quit. We're not going to give up. That's my legacy. That's what I received. Now I have two older brothers. They may receive something different. That's a legacy to celebrate. We're celebrating your legacy today. You're not even halfway done, friend. Because your legacy's already started. And even the failures are a part of our legacy. If I hadn't seen those fights, I wouldn't know how to make up with my wife. If I hadn't seen it done right, I wouldn't know what to do. We shouldn't hide our failures from our children. We shouldn't keep them from failing. If we're going to have a legacy of strength and growth and loyalty and hard work, they have to be able to try to do themselves. They have to be able to try and do what God is calling them to do, and sometimes they're going to fall flat on their face. And we have to say, get up. Get up. Not, oh, I got you, baby. Nobody's ever going to hurt you. Wow, you're heavy. It's because I'm 42, right? Right? I got you, baby. We're going to make this. No, it's get up. Get up. Oh, help me. You don't need help. This is your help. Get up. Because you have my legacy, but you have your own legacy. Get up. And this is the moment in David's life where he left his paint bucket too far behind. And this is what happened. It says, in the spring, at the time when kings would go off to war, what would happen? Kings would go off to war. Who was the king? David. David sent somebody in his place. It sounds just like Saul sitting on the throne, hearing a giant screaming outside his window. And in the day that the kings are supposed to go to battle, he sent David. This is the moment David left his paint bucket. He lost his source, either from boredom or burnout. I don't know. It's hard to be perfect all the time. That's why I don't even try it. Right? David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. So the only warrior left was David. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. You see how he just keeps coming back to that? They went out and succeeded, but David was at home. David killed Goliath, but Saul was picking up his armor. You see what I'm saying? There was a point where he just stopped. He said, I ain't got it today. Either in boredom or burnout. You see, when we get these passionate teachings and we get these ideas that really spark something inside of us, we jump out of that starting gate and we're like, I'm going to build a legacy. And we are getting it. And then one day we're like, what was that doing? It's like talking to my child. You know, we have this full conversation and I look at him and I do it. Uh-oh, there we go. I said, now go there and do it. And he says, do what? I'm like, and we just had a full conversation about this, right? We had these plans. What do you mean, do what? But he lost sight of it. It was in this moment that he would go out and see a lady on the roof with the most on-the-point name I've ever heard. Bathsheba. And Sheba bathing, okay? I don't know if you've ever been a man, but if you see a woman bathing, you're going to stop, right? I mean, when her mama named her, I don't know what she was thinking. I should have called her like Clothed Sheila or something, and we would have a totally different story. Right? Who bathes on the roof anyways? You know what I'm saying? So she was in like some modern society. He's out there, the only man in the city apparently, and he sees her at a moment of weakness because he was burned out. He was bored. He's like, I've been playing this God thing so long and I don't see the benefit of it. I've reached the pinnacle. I'm successful. What's next? Oh, there's a person bathing. He was in a place he should not have been. But he was there because he had forgotten the legacy that God had promised him. And this starts a downward spiral in his life. We see what Pastor Daniel spoke about last week with his kids. We just see from this moment on, David just lost sight. And so, obviously, we're not casting judgment on David. Matter of fact, the humility as the king to allow his story to be written in all of his details is a blessing for us. Because if they would have just wrote the story of David without the failures of David, we wouldn't know what it was like to be human. We wouldn't know what it was like to be a man after God's own heart, but still give in to lust, commit murder, lie. And this was a man whose integrity was so strong before this that even though Saul was trying to kill him, he was convicted just because he cut a corner of his robe. He cut Saul's robe off, and he was so convicted, he ran out in front of legions and said, if you want to kill me now, because I should never have done this. You talking about integrity? I've never had that kind of integrity. I would have been fighting that dude from behind the whole time. Right? I'd have clubbed him around the back. Right? The men would have been like, go kill him, and I would have already been gone. Right? I would have been doing it. They would be like, oh, he's gone. He's gone. I've never had that kind of integrity, but I've failed. And when I see a man of God fail and come back strong, I can look at it and say, maybe there is hope for me. I can't change what I've done, no more than David could, but I can keep going. I can maybe get back to where God wanted me to be. And so, if I were to tell you how to build legacy, I would have to just fall on what other people have taught. And it's simply this: begin with the end in mind. Begin with the end in mind. This is from 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Stephen R. Covey wrote that book. And he starts with the idea of look at your life. He said, imagine you're going into a funeral of a loved one, and you walk in and you see the grieving faces and the happy faces who are having a reunion or whatever. And you walk up and you look in the casket and it's actually your face. And then he says, go and sit down and listen. And as you listen to your friends and family talk about you, I want you to think about what you would have them say. All right, this is the part I was talking about earlier where it's fantasy. Right, where you're going to force your opinions on somebody else. But the truth is, we can actually use this to align us with the goals and purposes that God has for us. If we recognize that there is an end to our lives, I'm talking to every person in this room. You do not get a pass. It is appointed unto each man to die once. See, that's good. It doesn't have to happen twice. Once it will. There's going to be an end to your life. And so Covey writes this in his book. He said, how different our lives are when we really know what is deeply important to us. And keeping that picture in mind. All right, so this is a form of the paint bucket, if you will. Keeping that paint bucket with us. We manage ourselves each day to be and to do what really matters most. I can't control what you think of me. You're going to leave here. You may not say another word about me the rest of your life. You may make fun of me. You may talk highly about me. I really don't care. Just don't do it to my face. I can't control what you think about me, but I can control what I do the rest of my life. That's my goal. And so when we begin with the end in mind, I encourage you to take some time and do Stephen Covey's exercise and think, what if this was my funeral today? And what if that guy standing up there was my spouse or my best friend? And what if he had a few minutes to summarize my life? What would I want him to say or her? Was it how I loved? Was it how I worked? Was it how honest I was? What is it that matters most? And then I want you to take it a step further. Covey doesn't necessarily go here, but if we're believers, we are all called to be on mission for God. Jesus Christ has saved us for a purpose, and we each have our own. And so we need to be looking deeper and saying, God, if this was my last day, or when my last day comes, what would you have had me do with my life? What is it that I should have done for you while I was here? And then as we believe we receive that answer, we need to start building our lives for that purpose. And we need to keep it in front of us so that we're not like the painter walking miles in dryness, but we have our source with us. And just to give you an example, this is what David said to his son Solomon. David was 70 years old. He would be dying soon. Solomon is now king. This is in 1 Kings 2. This is what he said. When the time drew near for David to die, he gave a charge to Solomon, his son. All right, so he gave a charge. He said, son, this is my dying words. These are my dying words. I don't have time to play. I'm about to go the way of all the earth. So be strong. Act like a man. All right, that's another part of our society that they don't want happening anymore. Don't even get me started on toxic masculinity. Right? Act like a man. You got to say it loud. You can't be, act like a man. No. Act like a man and observe what the Lord your God requires. Don't miss it. Act like a man and observe what the Lord your God requires. See, in America, the church is 70% women. It's time men start acting like men and observe what the Lord your God requires. All right, I'll kick that soapbox and come back. Walk in obedience to him, keep his decrees and commands, his laws and regulations as written in the law of Moses. Do this so that you may prosper in all you do and wherever you go, and that the Lord may keep his promise to me. If your descendants watch how they live, and if they walk faithfully before me with all their hearts and souls, you will never fail to have a successor on the throne of Israel. Notice how many times he says it. Listen to him. Obey his law. It's his way. If you want to have a legacy, you get your eyes off of this and put your eyes up here. Your legacy will be built on how you serve God, not on anything else. Not on anything else. But notice the promise of Solomon's legacy came through his father. We do have responsibilities for those in our charge. Pastor Daniel has a responsibility to his children and to this congregation. You have responsibilities to your charges as well. And it's inherited. That legacy is passed on. So what are you going to do about it? What are you going to make of it? Because I'll tell you this. You never get a second chance to make a first impression, but you have the rest of your life to make a lasting one. Right? You can't go back and change people's opinion about what they initially thought about you. But you can keep on, keeping on, and maybe change that opinion later, maybe not. But you've got to make a lasting impression by following God. And sometimes we just got to shut other people off. I'm just going to keep doing what I know to do, and I'm not going to listen to the critics. Right? Got a Taylor Swift. Haters gonna hate. Just shake it off. Shake it off. Shake it off. I know that's an old song. It's an old song. I gotta act like a man. I apologize. But I have to leave it with you. We have to do what God's called us to do. That's the bottom line. We can't change anybody's opinion. We can't form their opinions. But we can be faithful to what God is calling us to do. And much like David's example, when we fail, we can come back like Psalm 51. and we can pray, and we can ask God to take us back. That's his legacy. That's his legacy to me. I just want to encourage you, think beyond today. What impact do you want to have the rest of your life? And start doing it today. Amen. Let's pray. Lord, I just give you honor and glory today. Lord, this was admittedly a struggle for me. Thinking about how hard it is to make a legacy and trying to make that perfect legacy and living a life worried about what other people are going to think about me. The truth is, God, there's only one opinion that matters, and that's yours. And we're going to stand before you one day, and we're going to have to answer for all the opportunities that you gave us. And so, God, I just pray, Lord, that today we will begin to think in a new way. Lord, that you will challenge us to trust you enough that you would not lead us astray. But you have called us to do things, and you will equip us to do it. That you can give us the courage to do it, Lord, and that we will step out in faith, act like men and women of faith, and serve you. And God, I just pray that you'll speak to all of us as individuals, that you'll speak to our hearts and show us what you have for each one of us. And God, we give you glory in Jesus' name.